Alissa Knight.
That major hack attack against Sony. First, the studio's movies.
3 days after Target confirmed the hacking of payment information from as many as 40 million customer credit and
Incoming message.
It's Friday, and that means time for another episode of LeetSpeak with Alissa Knight, bridging the gap between all things information security, where we'll talk the latest vulnerabilities, threats, security conferences, malware and exploits, as well as interview CISOs and CIOs from around the world on the IT risk management topics that matter most. Alissa Knight, one woman,
One mission.
one voice, and the world's foremost authority on hacking the cloud and Internet of Things. Coming to you unplugged and unleashed in this week's new episode of LeetSpeak.
With Alissa Knight.
Good morning from Seattle, Washington. This is Alissa Knight in a special episode of LeetSpeak that has absolutely nothing to do with cybersecurity. I've received a lot of questions from listeners and viewers on my YouTube channel just about being transgendered, not just being a transgendered woman, but a transgendered woman in cybersecurity, a transgendered woman in leadership as an executive, and also to comment on, some of the startling statistics that have been published on the number of transgendered persons killed just in 2018 alone. So, in light of the fact that it is LGBTQ Pride Month, I wanted to make a special episode of LeetSpeak that just talks about some of these questions, talks about some of these issues. I think, especially in today's political climate, a lot of feelings of being disenfranchised by certain parts of the U.S. population and, other concerns and issues regarding people's individual personal beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever belief it may be. And I think the impetus to what has gotten us to this point in our country is the fact that both sides of the conversation just don't come together to talk. I think there's just a lot of ignorance around LGBT issues, and I think it's important that we all talk about them and understand the other side. I struggle with anyone who is firm in their belief and does not want to try and understand opposing opinions or leave the possibility open that they may actually be wrong. I've lived my life from the very beginning of just wanting to understand everything and everybody, whether it was religion. I was raised in a Christian household, Presbyterian household. One of the things that I always wanted to do was understand all of the different religions that were out there, not just the one that I grew up in. Understanding the Buddhist faith, understanding the Muslim faith, and so I struggle with anyone who has a belief system, doesn't want to hear the other side, doesn't want to consider other ideologies. There's so many different idiosyncratic differences between all of the different religions, yet a lot of them, no matter what those idiosyncratic differences are, a lot of the religions are deeply rooted in love, and acceptance and not judging other people. I'll digress. I'd like to start this episode out with just a listing of the transgendered persons who've been killed in 2018 alone. And this is obviously particularly hits home for me, being a transgendered woman. The fact that the year is only half over and there's already been 12 homicides of trans Americans reported. That's 2 murders a month. And, one murder is too many. So as of June 2018, 12 trans Americans have been reported killed. The first known victim was Krista Lee Steele Nudslin. She was 42 years old, of North Adams, Massachusetts. She was the founder, coincidentally enough, of the Miss Trans America and Miss Trans New England pageants. She was found stabbed to death at her home on January 5th, and she was the first known transgendered person killed this year. Krista Lee Steele Nudslin was 42. Vicky Gutierrez was 33, found stabbed to death at her home in Los Angeles. Zacharia Fry was 28. Bodies found in trash bins in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Died from blunt force trauma to the head. Celine Walker, 36. Shot to death in Jacksonville, Florida. Tanya Harvey, 35. Shot to death in Buffalo, New York. Felicia Mitchell, 45. Shot to death in Cleveland, Ohio. Amia Tyree Berryman, 28. Shot to death in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Sasha Wall, 29. Shot to death in Chesterfield County, South Carolina. Carla Patricia Flores Pavin, strangled to death in Dallas, Texas. Nino Fortson, 36, shot to death in Atlanta, Georgia. Gigi Pierce, 28, shot to death in Portland, Oregon. And Tasha English, 38, shot to death in Jacksonville, Florida. The murder rates in the transgender community is awful, and it's I get this question a lot, and I had someone very close to me actually ask me one time, I don't understand it. I'm not homophobic, but I don't understand why why the LGBTQ community needs parades. And I guess a part of me playing devil's advocate can kind of try to understand that point. Understand that the person who asked me that is not homophobic. I do firmly believe that. I just it's just, I think questions like that are very deeply rooted in a lack of understanding of the dangers of being transgendered in either this country or any country in the world. A woman who's a lesbian can walk down the street, either long hair or short hair, and be able to, to put her sexual preference away of being lesbian and not, be identified as being a lesbian by passerbys or by people that don't agree. Whereas a transgendered person, especially, transgendered women who, really face this high bar in being passable, a lot of the times can't put that away. Transgendered women will walk down the street and, maybe they just started their transition. Maybe they're just starting hormone replacement therapy and they're not, very passable. It's dangerous. It can cause you to either be brutally, assaulted. It can even result in your death. When the reason for the parades, the reason for the, LGBTQ Pride Month, in contrast to, a heterosexual Pride Month or a heterosexual Pride Parade, the reason why we have those is for many reasons, to honor those who have been killed for being gay or transgendered, to honor ourselves because we're constantly being seen by society, by those around us as less than, especially those who don't agree. Now, I'm not trying to stereotype. I'm not saying that everyone sees, LGBTQ persons that way. I'm just saying that there's people within society where, heterosexuals are not the minority. They can't be fired from their job for being heterosexual. That's the likelihood of something like that happening is slim to none. But you can be fired from your job for being transgendered. There's no, a lot of people don't know this, but there's no federal laws, there's no protections in the workplace that prevent a company from firing an employee because they're transgendered. You know, the reason for the Pride Month, the reason for the Pride parades, the reason for the, just the celebration of being trans or celebration of being gay is because every day we wake up facing oppression, facing violence, facing a society that people within that society just don't agree with our lifestyle, don't agree with the way we've been born. And it's sad. The suicide rate of transgender people is just as alarming. The suicide rate of transgender people is 41%. That's 25 times higher than the rate of the general population. I posted a LinkedIn article sometime back, I want to say back in 2016, I think it was, on being transgendered and my journey from, my former life to now. Someone put a comment on there, is this appropriate for LinkedIn? And, I can understand where this gentleman was coming from, maybe at first glance, just off the title alone, or maybe if he didn't read the entire article, he may have felt that, it wasn't applicable to a professional networking site. However, the point of the article and the reason why I felt it was appropriate was the fact that the article was addressing the high suicide rate in the transgender community, and me wanting to be a beacon of hope for young transgendered, children, transgendered teenagers, transgendered, adults out there that, the adult entertainment industry, the adult sex industry is not the only hope for them being transgendered. A lot of transgender people think that because they're trans, they're not going to be able to get a job. And, I wanted that article to be empirical evidence for them that, somebody who is transgendered can find success in corporate America. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started and sold several companies up until this point in my life. And granted, to be fair, I hadn't transitioned in the, sale of my first two companies. I actually transitioned after the sale of my second company. So the argument can be made that I didn't sell those companies when I was transgendered. However, after I transitioned in 2008, I did start a new company, and the new company that I started, Breyer & Thorne, actually started out as a defense contracting company providing counterinsurgency support in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we had actually been awarded 2 subcontracts under L3 MPRI at the time, when MPRI existed, to provide counterinsurgency support and counter-IED support in Afghanistan and Iraq. And understand that the defense contracting industry is actually a very male-dominated, machismo industry. So, not only just being a women-led organization, but also a transgendered, lesbian women-led organization, you can imagine what kind of courage something like that took. Having said that, the point to the article was to provide hope, to provide a North Star for transgendered men and women out there that there is a place for them in corporate America. That just because you're transgendered doesn't mean that you can't have an office job or a white collar job or, work in a company post-transition. You can not only just succeed in corporate America, but you can go as far as you want. The sky's the limit when it comes to that. So who am I? I am the group CEO of Breyer & Thorne. I started this company in 2010. We are an IT risk management firm. We initially started providing penetration testing and incident response services. Around 2014, we opened our first security operations center and got our first managed security services client. We then transitioned to, no pun intended, providing network security monitoring for customers. So in addition to providing penetration testing where we attempt to hack into their network and then explain to them how we did it, work with them in remediating the vulnerabilities, on the managed security services side, we were effectively identifying attacks against their network using technologies like Alien Vault, whom we partnered with in 2014, and alerted them to those attempted breaches. Briar & Thorn has grown significantly since we first opened our doors in 2010. We are now at roughly 70% of our revenues are managed security services revenues, and about 30% are consulting services, penetration testing, incident response. A lot of our penetration testing now, I would say within the last few years since 2014, has really moved towards Internet of Things, where we're doing penetration testing against connected consumer devices, Internet of Cars, if you will, Internet of Everything. As a matter of fact, in 2014, we created a connected car division where we began working with a lot of the European automakers in doing penetration testing of their connected cars, telematics control units, electronic control units, head units, infotainment systems, that sort of thing. And it's actually really been my focus over the last few years. I've done roughly over 50 penetration tests of connected cars or risk assessments of connected cars since 2014, and have been traveling around Europe, Asia, Tokyo, the Near East, like Mumbai, India, doing presentations and keynote presentations at security conferences on hacking connected cars. It's really been an awesome practice for us recently as developing ourselves as recognized thought leaders in connected car security. As a matter of fact, later this year, I will be publishing a book with Wiley on hacking connected cars, which is really the first book to come to the bookshelf on hacking connected cars. So keep an eye out. It's going to be really exciting. It's going to be a great book. So my story is interesting. I was born in Seattle, Washington. I was the child of a marketing genius. My father, Gary Hines, was the director of marketing for Sun Microsystems, numerous other startups, including Hyundai Electronics, which was really cool. He actually at one point got me a job as their webmaster, and I actually came into Hyundai, developing HTML for them. So that was really neat, for my father to have brought me in there and actually work with him. I guess I had always been interested in breaking things. My first computer was a 386 SX25. It was actually a computer that my father brought home. I remember it was an IBM PS1 that he had bought at Costco. And at the time, extremely expensive. I want to say it was like several thousand. It was like $2,000 or $3,000. Pretty much what you would spend on a fully loaded MacBook MacBook Pro these days. So it was a lot of money. So if anyone remembers the IBM PS1, drop a comment, let me know. But, I remember, I believe it had 4 megs of RAM. So, it wasn't even in the gigs. It was in the megs. It was 4 megs of RAM. And, it was, it was a 3.5-inch floppy drive. I had just missed the 5.25-inch days. That's not to say that there weren't 5.25-inch, floppy drives in that computer or the computer that I ended up buying later. But, I started out in the floppy disk days. I remember taking that computer apart and, just to understand how it works, so I could put it back together. I remember my father coming home and seeing it in pieces all over the floor and almost having a heart attack. But for me, it was always, in order to understand something, you need to break it. You need to put it back together. And that's always been, my mantra's always been, what can be made by humans can be broken by humans. I've always believed that, why are people so afraid of breaking things? The only real way to fully understand something is taking it apart, breaking it, and then putting it back together, or trying to get it to work. I started out in the days, this was the early 90s, mid 90s, where, saving the money to buy the computer game was one thing. you would be at the computer store and, you'd buy the game. You finally saved up for it. I remember like Apache Maximum Overkill, I think it was called. Buy this game, cost you what, 50, $60. You'd bring it home. Then, it was about trying to get it to work, right? It wasn't just about, hey, I saved up the money to buy this game. It was, okay, I have the money. I bought the game. Now I need to get it to work. This was the days of creating auto exec bat files and, boot disks basically to, to get a game working. High mem equals to sys and, and you just crossed your fingers hoping you could get the game to load. In any case, that is how I started out. And then, I was introduced to the land of internet relay chat, IRC, and pound ANSI, and, pound ASCII, and, pound hack, and pound frac. And, that's really how I got into hacking. I started talking and meeting with people on IRC, understanding the concept of shells. And, at the time, it was all really Solaris stuff, Spark Solaris Unix. Linux really didn't have the kind of penetration on, internet-based servers at the time. It was mostly, Spark Solaris stuff, HPUX, IBM AIX. So, the idea of a graphical internet, just wasn't around. I mean, we had AOL. I had actually started a BBS in Seattle at the time. It was a multi-node BBS, meaning that it had multiple lines coming in. I had we had started out with a 2400 baud modem, for those of you who remember modems, and grew it to a pretty significant user base. It was always really exciting whenever you had international dial-up users, people that would, call in from another country, probably phone freakers that were calling in. But in any case, so, this was the day of red boxes, blue boxes, banana boxes, black boxes. Those of you who are familiar with phone freaking or remember phone freaking, when, playing back dial tones into a payphone gave you a free call. Come to think of it, I haven't seen a payphone in a very long time. Anyway, yeah, so middle school, I was just kind of dorking around with, with my computer, trying to get games to work. Then I went into high school, and that's when things kind of changed for me, and I started to, talk to and meet other hackers, understand the concept of hacking, understand the concept of what a buffer overflow was. And I made the mistake in it was my senior year in high school. It was, just a few weeks before I turned 18, I hacked into a government network and got caught, of course. The law enforcement was waiting for me when I arrived at school. I was immediately arrested, and the one thing my father said was, at least most parents go to jail to pick up their kids for drugs or for killing someone. Well, maybe not killing someone, maybe for drugs and for theft or something. I came to pick up my child because they hacked into a computer network. It was my first compromise. It was a vulnerable Apache server. It was a vulnerable web Apache server. It was a buffer overflow in Apache. We had backdoored the login binary, so anytime you typed in the password Buddha at the password prompt, it would drop you into a root shell. Pretty nifty. Anyway, so that was really my first dive into security, from the black hat side. Then the district attorney, I was very lucky. The district attorney of California dropped the charges, and I actually turned my life around. Got involved in cybersecurity on the white hat side of things, and started my first cybersecurity company actually after being expelled from high school. Yes, I am a high school dropout. Started my first startup. This was about the the .com days, we actually lived in San Jose, California. Much credit to my father, who got transferred and went to work for Sun Microsystems. I got to actually grow up in Silicon Valley during the dot-com days. Started my first company. It was actually acquired. It was a cybersecurity services company. And we were acquired by a company out of British Columbia, Vancouver, and worked for them for a while. Did a short stint with them, and then came back and worked for startups in the Valley after that. And then started my second successful startup called AppliedWatch. It was a security information and event management solution, or SIM solution, for open source software. And we basically aggregated events and allowed you to manage Snort, Inline Libre, Tar-Pit, Nessus. It basically was a SIM for open source tools, security tools. That was acquired by a company called Endace in New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. So that was a really exciting time in my life. And after that, moved to San Francisco, transitioned, realized that I could no longer live my life the way I was, and transitioned and started my new firm. And long story short, well, okay, maybe that was a long story, but not short. But fast forward to today, here I am. I'm now living in Seattle, Washington, between my home here and my home in Tijuana, Mexico, traveling back and forth and traveling around the world to Europe and Asia, speaking at security conferences on hacking connected cars, and really just putting all of my effort into thought leadership in IoT security. Some of the questions that I like to clarify with, as it relates to transgendered people, is a lot of people think, okay, just because you're transgendered, you go through with the sexual reassignment surgery, or SRS. That's a big misunderstanding. Just because you're transgendered doesn't necessarily mean that you actually will go forward with SRS. Your sexual organs don't actually dictate your gender identity. The difference between sex and gender is that sex is a biological concept made on biological characteristics, whereas gender deals with personal, societal, and cultural perceptions of sexuality. There's actually been a lot of talk in recent months and years about gender and sex, particularly with the modern progressive world in which we now live today, where flexible ideas of gender and identity are beginning to flourish around the world. Human beings are no longer being bound by such binary concepts as male and female. It's not either just male, just female. It's not 1 and 0. It's, masculine and feminine, or man and woman. Centuries and millennia of social tradition and scientific belief are now being challenged by these ideas, which makes it all the more important to understand the difference between the two. For a very long time, the words gender and sex were used interchangeably, but that is not only no longer the case, also nowhere close to being the truth. So for those who want to progress with the times and embrace the full spectrum of human identity, a common question arises. What is the difference between sex and gender? I'm going to try and demystify that now. So the term sex refers to biological characteristics, namely chromosomes, internal and external sex organs, and the hormonal activities within the body, which I referred to earlier with testosterone and estrogen. Essentially, when we use the term sex, what we're really commenting on is male versus female, scientifically speaking, of course. The sex of an individual is based on genetics, making it much more difficult to change. For those who need a quick recap on human genetics, men and women both possess 46 chromosomes, as well as 2 sex chromosomes. Women have 2 X chromosomes, whereas men possess 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. It is this Y chromosome in men that causes the testes to form, as the Y chromosome is dominant. This difference in chromosomes also causes the variation in hormones that are found within the body. Women, for example, have much higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, which stimulate the body to develop primary and secondary characteristics, such as breasts, menstruation, etc. Men, on the other hand, have much higher levels of testosterone than women. Yes, believe it or not, women actually do have testosterone. These genetically controlled factors result in the physiological and biological differences between the sexes, but that isn't where the story ends. Although many people look at sex as natural and the fundamental difference between men and women, there is actually quite a bit of gray area in between, making this issue far from a dichotomy between male and female. Due to the endlessly unpredictable nature of life, some women are born with Y chromosomes, and men can have 2 or even 3 X chromosomes. Intersex humans have sexual characteristics of both men and women. While this portion of the population has often been excluded or alienated in the past, that is thankfully beginning to change in certain parts of the world. Experts believe that approximately 0.1% of the population is actually born as an intersex individual, equivalent to roughly 7.5 million people around the world. Clearly, sex is not as clear as we once thought it was, but that's nothing compared to gender. Now, what does gender mean, and how is it different from sex? Unlike sex, gender does not have a basis in science, although it's affected by the biological and physiological characteristics we display as males and females. Instead, gender is based on the societal constructions and belief systems put in place that deal with masculinity and femininity. The gender identity that most people adhere to is usually unconscious and forced upon us at an early age. We see the concepts of gender in the colors assigned to children: blue for boys, boys aren't allowed to like pink, girls aren't allowed to like blue, the common length of our hair, men short, women long, the toys we play with, the jobs we aspire to, and the behaviors and interests we're supposed to embrace. Throughout history, gender roles have been put in place based on societal constructs, and the strength of these traditions is shocking at times. Even today in the modern world, shifting gender roles and identity is met with great opposition. Some countries still firmly adhere to ancient gender assignments, such as women being subservient to men, unequal rights between the sexes, and the illegality of those who wish to embrace alternative gender identities. However, if we look back in history, we can easily identify how certain gender identification markers have actually shifted or even completely reversed, which is evidence that gender is completely fluid and should remain in so in order to highlight individuality and embrace choice. A short list of these include high heels, makeup, wigs, and color pink, all of which were originally or primarily associated with masculinity or the male gender, while now they are largely embraced by the female gender. Around the world, an incredibly diverse range of gender norms and societal influences change this idea. So proposing that gender is a rigid or permanent classification for a dynamic individual, nation, or species is actually foolish. The idea of being a real man creates a cult of masculinity, which is not a healthy standard to force upon those who feel or believe differently. Similarly, being a good woman, particularly in the past, is associated with rules of femininity and have resulted in practical and psychological oppression for millennia. Many people do not firmly fit within one gender and instead embrace the concept of gender fluidity. So to summarize, many people believe that sex is determined by nature, whereas gender is determined by nurture. But even that is too binary classification. Sex does impact gender, but neither of these qualities in a person is a definition. These concepts help us understand who a person is, not what they are, which allows the opportunity for personal choice and change. Neither of these words is a definition, but rather a description, and should be treated accordingly. In summary, sex depends on the anatomy, gender depends on the society or culture. Two completely different things. That's enough on sex and gender, enough on LGBTQ issues. Next week, we will be going back to discussing cybersecurity and IT risk management, especially in the sphere of Internet of Things. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and most importantly, love yourself and love each other. Remember, no one is going to love you as much as you will love yourself. Remember that you are a masterpiece.